is absolutely free.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we dive into our Stanley Cup odds segment for today's show, I do want to remind you guys yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. Is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. But coming up on today's show, we have another bit of a betting odds segment. We are going back to the world of hockey as we look at the updated Stanley Cup odds for the 2024-25 NHL season. What a fantastic year we had in hockey this year. Fantastic, dramatic Stanley Cup final where both teams looked like they had long stretches of where they were dominant. Ultimately, the Florida Panthers were your 2023-24 NHL champion. But this year, there's going to be a lot of new teams in the reckoning again, and a lot of excitement surrounding these top teams I have on my list that I really believe will step forward and make names for themselves. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off with the number one favorite in terms of betting odds, the Edmonton Oilers. The Edmonton Oilers, really tough way to lose the Stanley Cup final after coming back from a 3-0 deficit to force that Game 7. But when all is said and done, they still have the components there. McDavid's not going anywhere for a little bit, so is Draisaitl. So this offseason is just mainly about retaining all the pieces you like going forward and making sure that no one you really desperately think you need on this team in order to make that similar run leaves. And immediately, they got right down to it. They re-signed Adam Henrique, who was a very important player in terms of his play in both the Western Conference semifinal and the Stanley Cup final. He added that extra level of depth at the forward position, the lines, and they also re-signed Matthias Janmark. Fantastic postseason as well. Really crucial to the way Chris Knobloch was able to play certain lines, find certain groupings and combinations that worked for him in different series. And so, ultimately, that was all the Edmonton Oilers really needed to do. They also bought out Jeff Skinner's contract from Buffalo. I really like that addition. Adds depth and physicality yet again to the forward groups. And it's all about that life, because they have the setup that they need in order to make another run. They have the power play. They now have the depth of the defensive positions. And they also have the youth they have. Guys like Dylan Holloway are going to get more playing time. Guys like Philip Broberg are going to get more playing time. So I really like the direction the Oilers are going to take, even when they bid adieu to McDavid and Draisaitl. So I think the Edmonton Oilers at plus 800 are a good bet to return to the Stanley Cup Finals and this time win it. But then again, right behind them are the team that beat them in the Stanley Cup Final, the Panthers at plus 900. They, similar to the Edmonton Oilers, I forgot to mention about the Edmonton Oilers, they did fire the legendary GM, Ken Holland. When all said and done, he's going to be a Hall of Famer. And finding a replacement for him is going to be difficult. But ultimately, I think the Oilers right now just edge the Panthers in terms of just retaining the core that they already have. The Panthers are similar to what Edmonton is doing, are also retaining their core. The most important aspect of it was retaining and tying down one of my favorite fantasy players of this past year, my favorite players in the NHL right now, the top goal scorer from last season, Sam Reinhart. Because you look at the Florida Panthers, the way they won last year because they were a team that was connected to their identity. Every single player understood their role, no matter which line they were on, no matter what grouping they were on, no matter which power play unit they were on. They always found a way. And Sam Reinhart was the face of that because he was the guy, no matter what, whether he was in the face-off, the power play, whether stepping back in the defensive zone and helping his team there. Sam Reinhart was here, there, and everywhere. And it's truly translated to one of his best seasons in a Florida Panthers jersey. I think that when all is said and done, when you take away a guy like Sam Reinhart from the Florida Panthers, you take away a large part of the kind of player who they want to build around, the profile that they want to build around. So it was very paramount that Sam Heinart stayed. They also re-signed Anton Lundell, a very sneaky defenseman that I really like. Had kind of a rocky postseason, kind of stepped it up in the Stanley Cup final, but ultimately he's a very integral part of their defensive structure as well. But overall, when I look at the Oilers and Panthers, these are the two teams that really have the least question marks in the league. Maybe if you look at the Oilers, it's the goaltending, and maybe if you look at the Panthers, it's kind of, maintaining and sustaining their excellence. But when all is said and done, I think these two teams are the best in respective conferences and deserve to be at the top of these betting odds. Looking at the teams behind them, starting off the Dallas Stars with 10-1 odds, I think Dallas was just this close to being the Western Conference Finals representative. And in my opinion, they were just one player away from being that Western Conference Finals representative. And that player was Roope Hintz, because when Roope Hintz was healthy, you saw the impact he had if you were a hockey fan in the Western Conference semifinals. That partnership between him and Jason Robertson is something to behold. And I really like the Dallas Stars. Whenever I talk about the Dallas Stars, I talk about the melding together of both youth and experience. When I look at what the the Dallas Stars are capable of, is the fact that they can develop the prospects they have, whether it be through the draft or young players they acquire, and mix them into the experience they already have. Roope Hintz, one of the more experienced players. Jason Robertson, a little less so. Wyatt Johnston, Thomas Harley, also very youthful. And they themselves are becoming the best players on this squad. When you combine them with guys like Miro Heiskanen and Pavelski on the back end, a lot of experience, a lot of ice time together, you get one of the most well-rounded squads in the Western Conference. A team that's just going to continue to grow prospects. Look out for the prospect they drafted in this draft, Emil Hemming. I really like his upside. When all is said and done, I think Dallas could sneak into the top two in terms of betting odds, mainly because a lot of people are underestimating what injuries did to this team. If every single player was healthy in the Dallas Stars, they could have won the Stanley Cup this year. But it is what it is, and perhaps that's why odds makers aren't willing to put them in that Oilers-Panthers duopoly and see them at that highly. But coming in at number 4, kind of a surprise team, but if you're a tri-state area person, you will definitely like to hear that. Maybe not if you're in the metropolitan area or the tri-state area. It's the New Jersey Devils coming in at 11-1 odds. And look, I actually see it. I think that the New Jersey Devils, in the offseason, looked at their weaknesses. Their defense needed a little bit of shoring up behind leader Dougie Hamilton. And they needed a goaltender who didn't have to constantly rotate in and out. They've struggled at the goaltender position for many years. So they said, okay, these are the departments we need to fix. And I really like the move they made. They got Jacob Markstrom, a solid goaltender, was in the kind of Vezina Trophy reckoning a couple of years ago. I had him on my fantasy hockey squad, and honestly, he carried me. So, solid goaltender in between the sticks that they can rely upon for a lot more games than a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood or Akira Schmid. And then you bring in guys like Brett Pesca and Brendan Dillon from the Jets, who can really shore up a defense that's probably the weakest part of this team. But when I look at the forward depth, I definitely say this team can contend for the Cup. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Yegor Sharangovich. I really love the structure of the building. And they got rid, most importantly, of Lindy Ruff, who's a guy who I don't necessarily believe had the culture that the New Jersey Devils needed at that moment in time. I think they needed someone who was able to bring in that extra level of production for them and someone who fit into the comfortability of the squad. At the end of the day, they didn't necessarily do that. And so I feel like now is the time for the Jersey Devils to pounce in the Eastern Conference, because they now have the depth, they diagnose the problems, fix them, and going into the season they should be rejuvenated, ready to go. And then rounding up the top 5 is the Colorado Avalanche. I'm kind of shocked they're this low as well, because they still have one of the best, if not the best, cores in the NHL with Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Cale Makar, and Gabe Landeskog. I think that ultimately, when this group is healthy, they are beautiful to watch. And it's annoying sometimes because they're in the same conference as my Edmonton Oilers. But when all is said and done, this team should always be in the reckoning for the Stanley Cup. Because, as we saw just 2 short years ago, when everyone is clicking for them, they are a machine that cannot be slowed. And it all just relies upon how the health of this team impacts them. And so, I really believe that at the end of the day, when you're looking at this team, they're definitely going to be forcing their way into the duopoly in terms of betting odds. But right now, this top 5 definitely very diverse. I like the Devils being there. I think they're a team that should be in the reckoning always. But at the end of the day, I really like this setup here in terms of the Stanley Cup. Coming next, we continue yet again with our IDP player profile, this time talking about a corner who, due to injury concerns and the injury bug following him constantly, hasn't really had a chance to show what he can be at his best. We'll get into why I think that after the break.